So today we're sitting with one of my closest friends and mentor, Erik Young.
Howdy! How's it going?
It's going good. How are you?
Doing good. Yeah, doing good.
What have you been up to lately?
Lots of work and plenty of relaxing too. So, going to a lot of shows lately, which is nice. Both trade shows, but more on the boring side, on the toy side.
Okay.
Also going to like a lot of concerts and I'm pretty good about going to see live shows and stuff like that.
I know you love the arts. I know there's multiple times I've like reached out to you and you're like, I'm at the ballet right now. I gotta be
Yeah.
So like.
Yeah, we're at the end of ballet season. Ballet season literally just ended.
Nice.
So and the same thing with the opera just wrapped up too.
Nice.
But I like to go out to do a lot of stuff, but I try to stay busy.
And that's one thing I can appreciate is like you support the arts in different like forms.
Yeah.
And stuff, and I always admired because like the vast hobbies you have.
Yeah, I
surprised me.
I like to say I like to like things, you know. So it does like I enjoy finding new things and learning about them and participating with them and the people too. Like I like to getting to know the people of the ballet and the opera is always something that's interesting too.
That's good.
So,
and I feel like you have the same mentality with like comics as well too.
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, that really I've been very lucky that, the community around comics is something that's always been really good to me. Mm-hmm. And obviously that's how I got to know you. That's how I got to know, a lot of my friends, the people who I still see on a weekly basis. And for the most part, I met them in comic shops, even more the people who I met in school or anything else. It's that the community around that culture has always been really, really good to me. I'm very lucky.
That's good, yeah. And that's what I was about to say. It just happens to be the community. It's where you feel like you fit in the most, so that makes sense.
Yeah, that's it. It's nice to be around people. Shared interest, you start at a foundation where you guys, at the very least know that you can talk about the same things.
Right.
And so, it makes those friendships really easy, especially over a long period of time.
That makes sense, yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
So let's get into your work. What are you working on right now?
So for work right now, I recently moved over to Toy Temple, and I'm their chief commercial officer. So my job is to kind of take some of the bigger plans that we have, bigger initiatives, and then help all the departments coordinate to get them done.
Okay.
So as we expanded some new channels, making sure that they have the proper support for operations and marketing, all kind of working together, so that we can get the data that we need to make sure that product is running out smoothly, the pricing is right, but also just making sure that they have the marketing support that they need and we're purchasing the right products. So it's really nice. I've been in this industry for a long time. I've done a ton of different things, and this job is a nice culmination of everything where I get to it's really, really fun. I get to try a bunch of stuff, and do a bunch of use a lot of the skills that I've gained over the years in different places.
And we'll go over those.
I'm sure we'll talk about it, but
so Toy Temple, they work with a bunch of different IPs and different toy companies. What are some of the ones that you're seeing right now that you like working with?
So on the manufacturer side, we've been working really closely with U2s for a little while.
Okay.
And they are really, really cool. They have great designs. Their vinyl stuff is really, really sick, and particularly on the plush side, they have really gorgeous plush.
Nice.
And we've done quite a few exclusives with them over the years. My favorite one is our Burning Godzilla. It's huge, it's 20 inches. It's really, 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 really cool. It's got the Burning Godzilla orange on his scales.
Cool,
yeah, it's really, really sick. And we work with a bunch of other companies in similar capacities. So we work with Funko closely, Thrilljoy closely, Epoch, they're a card company out here.
Nice. Okay.
So. Yeah, it's a really fun job. We get to, touch base with a lot of different places, work with a lot of companies who I've known in the past, some who I haven't, and then help them to decide, hey, what IP do we think is hot? What IP would we be interested in purchasing full manufacturing runs of? And then that type of stuff.
That's cool.
It's really, really cool. And the people I work with, the guy who owns the company, Johnny, I've also known since way back when I was working at Pop Culture Paradise. So again, it's that like same community, man, the nerd mob just kind of taking care of each other.
Right,
so.
as it should be.
Yeah,
sometimes
that's it.
you're met with competition, or some of the collectors feel more aggressive than like just the people who want to collect like single issues.
Yeah.
And so it feels a bit competitive here and there, but not as bad as toys can be.
No, toys can be really competitive. There's also just like the industry is much different. It's much more like in certain places it's much more corporate, you know, certainly than you get in the majority of the comics world.
Yeah.
And the import export of it is a little bit more trying because there's not as much centralized distribution. So competition just looks a lot different than it does in comics.
Okay.
Yeah. And also frankly there's just like more money to be had too. So
which is a big plus.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. Like, I mean, I absolutely love comics. In a perfect world, I would stay in comics forever and ever and ever. And I just know toys really well because I've worked in comics for a long time.
Okay, yeah.
And that's the place that I consistently go to you know, just make a couple extra bucks.
Yeah.
You know, because
Yeah.
the money's more consistent and the industry is just more established in a different way. I don't should even say more established. It's just established in a different way.
Yeah,
But,
yeah. It just feels a bit more popular, maybe, but
Yeah.
that's a whole other thing.
It certainly is. You know, like not as much at Toy Temple where I am now, but at some of my previous companies, I've worked with like national size companies. You know, so I've worked with like big specialty stores and mass stores.
Yeah.
So you know, you don't have that opportunity in comics. Like we have in the past, but not in a serious way. You're just never gonna have the same amount of individual SKUs, comic SKUs in a Walmart than you are gonna have toys.
Yeah.
It just
Yeah, they have
unfortunately
aisles
is the
and
case.
aisles.
Yeah, but they also have aisles of books. And nobody looks at them, but they're there. Comics should certainly be able to, whatever, that's a whole other conversation. I don't necessarily, we can get deeper into that for sure. I think there's a lot of complexities there as to whether or not comics really even belong in mass. And I know that's something that a lot of people aim for in this industry, but I think it's actually frankly pretty complicated.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, the fact of the matter is there's just more toys out there, you know. So, and it's a lot of the same people, a lot of the same, you know, distribution channels.
Right, or the same IP even.
Oh yeah, oh totally, the same IP for sure.
Yeah.
You know, and a lot of the stuff that I sell right now started off as comics, right? Like most of what I sell is anime product, and almost all of that started as manga.
Yeah.
You know, so it's still that funnel. You know, it starts with you know 2D art, and then eventually makes its way into animation, eventually makes its way into merchandising. You know,
T-shirts and
T-shirts and yeah, and you know, anime certainly like is the major movement in, you know, that sector of adult collectibles right now. Anime is just so important. And you know, it's easy for people to forget that anime usually is really just manga. Yeah, it's almost always the case. Yeah.
So you're at Toy Temple right now, but let's dig into the past a little bit.
Sure. Yeah.
So when did you start reading comics?
Oh man, that's a really good question. So the first comics that I had, I was pretty young. Not necessarily when I would say that I became like a comic reader, but the first comic that I ever read, there's a couple in my mind, and I'm not sure which one actually was the first. But early Sonic the Hedgehog stuff that I got on vacation when I was a kid with my parents. And then there was a comic shop that lasted for like probably less than a year, right in the suburb that I'm from, and they had like they would do these days where they would put up whole tables full of really cheap comics, and I picked up some hot stuff, and. Yeah, I have very fond memories of both of those comics. I'm not sure which one is actually the first in my head. Those were the first comics I had. I think when I first started seriously reading comics would probably be in middle school. And, you know, from there it was pretty much off to the races. I had an adopted brother, Jake, who was really, really into comics. And then when he got a little bit older and then stopped living in our house, left all of his comics behind for me to read, which was great. Yeah, it was 2 big stacks of books. really pretty good run of Lee's X-Men stuff. There's a good run of Uncanny X-Men. Lots of comics that I like went on to kind of color the comics that I liked. Dark Horse Speed Racer, which I think is an absolutely amazing series that people don't talk about very often. It's very bizarre. Really, really good, like introduction to kind of some more surreal comics. But yeah, that's kind of the beginning of me reading comics, and then got more and more serious with time. You know, started off at Atomic Comics. Would go there, you know, weekly or bi-weekly in high school. I'd have my friends take me there.
Nice.
And then eventually Ash Ave, which I know for a lot of people in Phoenix who became serious readers, that was the vehicle. You know, Drew. Yeah, it really is. Drew's a fantastic reader. He's really well versed. He put together a fantastic inventory that allowed young people who were interested in learning about comics as a whole to like dive in really deep.
Nice.
So, a lot of fond memories. You know, not just like buying comics, but really learning how to be a serious reader in that store. And then, you know, being able to take some of that to, you know, different parts of the industry that I've worked at over the years too.
That's totally true. And that is one thing I appreciate about Drew, because we talked about that in our episode too, where he's like, I have a section where you can learn about comics. And how to make comics and like the different ages of comics and stuff like that.
And like very serious discourse about comics. You know, like he has a lot of books that are just like really good books about the history of publishing and the history of individual artists and stuff like that, which frankly I wouldn't even say you don't find at every shop. It is very rare to find that.
It's rare. It's hard to find on the internet.
Yeah, it really is. And that was something that like I was pretty like desperate for young, you know, like I really enjoyed, you know, the making of comics and the business of comics, even at a pretty young age. Like it was something that fascinated me. And so, you know, there's very few places where you can get that outlet without just doing it. And Drew's shop has always been pretty good about that. You know?
And he's just really well versed in the industry and knows like timelines and eras, and has also seen like things shape and evolve too. Like he lived it, so like Drew's real good for information on stuff like that.
And that, like legitimately going back to the community thing, that's some of the coolest parts of my life in comics and my career in comics. It's just like meeting people who could be like very serious shepherds and mentors in different ways who could like just change the way that I think about comics, change the way I think about the industry, like make me better readers, you know.
That's good. That's cool.
Joe Lunday is somebody who I worked with back in the day at Diamond, and we can get into the Diamond, I'm sure, somewhere in here. But Joe is the first person who really taught me to think about comics as schools, and you know, different artists learning underneath other artists, and kind of how like the comics education system worked, and you know, how like that like gray area between comics and fine art degrees, and where different people learned from each other, which was really like opened up my mind in a different way when considering like, you know, what it takes to make a comic and what it takes to make a comic creator too.
That's interesting.
It's really lucky over the years just to meet people who, you know, can expand your horizons in these ways that I didn't even know possible. And there's so much to learn. Comics is like, it's medium. You know, it's not
weird to once you like break it down to the smallest thing.
It'd be like trying to dedicate your life to learning about television, which is like an insane feat.
It is a thing. It's totally.
There's plenty of them out there. You know, and, for sure.
Right. It's the same thing with television as comics, where it's like for some reason people look down on that or don't take it as seriously as it actually is. And then that's when you get like the value of these things like diminished too a little bit, which is unfortunate.
And I think going back to talk about like the opera and the ballet, and it's interesting if you look at the history of a lot of different art forms, when people look down on them and when they stop looking down on them, and kind of like the ups and downs of something being lowbrow, you know, which is always something that's like particularly interesting to me because comics are my foundation, and a lot of the way that I interact with other media comes from the way that I interacted with comics when I was younger, which is kind of a strange thing. Like even the way that I watch TV oftentimes is like, it mirrors the way that I would learn about, a comic creator. Just because that's just the first thing the first medium and the first bit of art that I learned how to learn about was comics. And digest was comics, So a lot of I kept that same system and process in place for a lot of other places where it frankly probably just doesn't fit all the time either, but that's just how people's minds work, so.
And I mean, you're still having a good time. I would say that it's fine then. You've got the point across.
That's exactly it. Yeah, and 90% of it is just participating in the thing. I'm very, very lucky that I've never, strangely enough, unlike a lot of people who really like comics, never really had the desire to be a comic maker. Yeah.
Did you not though? Did you not make a comic?
I've written some comics in the past, but that's never been my goal. For sure, I've never when I saw my career in comics, it never once was and then I will be a famous writer. It just never, that was never a goal for me. And I the idea of writing comics, certainly way more than I ever even liked writing comics. Because I find I'm just not particularly kind to myself in artistic endeavors. But I'm very kind to other people. I love other people's art. So, it's fortunate. I really enjoy being a spectator.
You like to like things.
Yeah, I like to like things, I don't feel like I have to be making them to enjoy it, even though I'm sure I would enjoy it in a completely different way, and I'm very aware of that. When I hear people who make comics talk about comics, they talk about it in a way that I'm just not even capable of.
I feel that. Have you ever tried your hand at drawing at all? Have you ever picked up a pencil and was like, I'm gonna make a guy?
I did. When I was younger, when I was in high school, I would draw. I never even got to the point where I doubt that I ever even drew anything sequential. But I would copy covers and find. I definitely had just because I was a kid into comics, and that all of a sudden that's the kind of presents you get too. So I definitely got lots of how to draw comic books when I was younger and stuff like that, because that's what people think. Yeah.
And they're I don't know what to choose from one of these. I'm gonna get them the standard.
Exactly. And looking back at that too, if I could have properly expressed myself, I would have much more enjoyed a book about the industry probably. even at
a little deeper.
Yeah, even at 14, I think I would have been much more interested in how does the store owner make money? That would have been much more interesting to me even at that age. So
So you've always been interested in comics. You've always been interested in the business of comics. I know you've worked at Diamond. Was Diamond before or after the comic shops?
So that was after. So my very first introduction to working with comics at kind of at all was this local dealer named Randy.
Just Randy.
Well, yeah, I'm always sure if I should give people's first and last names. But Randy is somebody that people certainly would remember. He hasn't lived in in this area for a very long time, but he was certainly a staple for a good number of years. And he would set up at small shows. He set up at Arizona Mills Mall, which was my first introduction to him, and I was so curious just how he worked this thing.
And so that was a pretty big.
Yeah, and he was it was mostly a card show, and he sold comics, but he had a decent spread because he was the only person not selling sports cards. And that was kind of towards the tail end of the the first Pokemon bubble. And he was still selling that type of stuff too. But anyways, so I was curious, asked him a lot of questions, and finally he was hey man, if you ever want to come over and help me out sometime, feel free. And so I was yes, next whenever you are here next time, we'll figure this out. So did a couple of shows with him, and then kind of cocky, frankly, just as a kid, was I think what he's doing, I could probably do.
15.
Yeah, exactly. And not even realize it's a whole Dunning-Kruger thing. It's I had no idea what I didn't know. And there was so much that I needed to learn. And so I approached him and was I'm interested, what would it take if I just wanted to buy some bulk comics off of you? How much would I have to spend in order to start getting a discount? And really kind of unclear as to even pricing tiers and stuff like that. And back then, we're talking in the age of like even before dollar comics, really. So, you know, it was a lot of like 50-cent, 25-cent comics.
That's so wild.
That's nuts. It really is. Yeah. So, and then he hooked me up with a bunch of cheap comics, and I just like was so interested in each individual comic. I wanted to price each individual book. You know, I spent so much time just like digging through like old gemstone price guides and like really learning comics.
Yeah.
And I would just go through those boxes and then sort everything out. This is really before the internet would have helped a lot.
Yeah.
It was available as a resource, but not in the same way.
It was Overstreet?
Mm-hmm. Overstreet, yeah.
Those were...
Yeah, it would be the Overstreet. Overstreet would have been the ones that I was reading then.
That's
so,
wild.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure Gemstone was the publisher on them.
It feels like it.
I think they're all attached to that same diamond imprint at one point.
I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah. And, but the Overstreet guides were like huge for me. I spent a lot of time digging through them and just realized that there's a lot of comics out there that were, you know, mispriced. And so started digging through different shops, finding new places to purchase bulk.
Yeah.
At this point, I'm not even really working with Randy anymore. I'm in college now, and it's just like a decent side hustle for me. I had a little bit of extra money, had some opportunities to spend it in some new places, and started to buy collections more and more with time.
You were like even ahead of like the eBay people.
This is how early I was selling comics on eBay before there was PayPal, so it was like taking payments was complicated.
Yeah.
And I would literally take checks from people. It was very strange times.
Yeah.
That's wild to even think about. But yeah, the first stuff that I saw, that was really even before PayPal and eBay were like, you know,
even a thing.
Tied together.
Yeah.
Crazy. Yeah. And then I started doing some shows. And buying from different collectors, buying from different shops, which like really in the end of the day like informed a lot of my career, was making those connections with stores.
Yeah.
And then started going to shows, got picked up by a store that had recently been purchased, Pop Culture Paradise. It changed hands a few times, and then one of the owners who had it for a little while longer, Marco, ended up taking me on. We had met at a show, and he was like, hey, would you be interested in just jumping in? I was like, I don't know, I'm kind of doing my own thing, I enjoy it. He's like, I'll make you a manager. And I was like, it's like almost out of college and starting to wonder what my life after college would look like. This was also like entering into the recession, so I knew that like I couldn't. A lot of the plans that I had probably just weren't going to live up to the way my expectations of them.
That makes sense. What was it that you went to school for again?
So I went to school for medical anthropology.
Not business, which is wild.
Not business at all. No.
That's a hobby.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but then by the time that So I found a bunch of places to take free business classes. I found a lot, like over the years I've always like loved learning things, and so like I found a lot of resources to, you know, learn. I also would just go to ASU often and just sit in classes that I wasn't supposed to be in, and you start early and nobody notices, and you can stay there for a long time. I don't know if you should keep that in, but
it's definitely harder to do now when they have like the clicker check-in.
Totally. Yeah. Also, yes, totally. I'm sure there's a number of problems that would make that impossible now. Even then, some of the stuff was starting to happen where it's like paper tests were going away. A lot of stuff was moving to their online portal.
Yeah.
So like I couldn't participate in, you know, like some of the stuff that I normally would have been able to by just sitting in the classes.
Yeah.
But, you know, SBA, a bunch of places for me to take, you know, little courses and business courses out here, which was really, really fortunate too. And I learned stuff along the way because I always kind of knew that I wanted to do my own thing, but was never really confident in my skills, which like was good because it just made me gather more skills. It, you know, encouraged me to keep learning.
That's good. Yeah. I'm glad you could see that in yourself. Some people would have tried, not realize they were missing skills, and then blame the world for it. So good for you.
Yeah, and I also just like, so it was just like pure anxiety. Like I was so worried about accounting, even though like really nobody cared. I wasn't making enough money for anybody to pay attention to, but I was so nervous about the IRS coming after me, so it like taught me to do my taxes, little stuff like that, where, you know, like anxiety can fuel you in a positive way as well.
I'd say it worked out.
Yeah, it did, so Marco was really fortunate to meet Marco at the time that I did. Mm-hmm. It was a good time in comics. And he kind of just like let me have my way of that shop for a while. Mm-hmm. He took a lot of my suggestions. I got to like take the lead on purchasing and help with us expanding and doing a lot of things that frankly, like, if I had come in at a different time or with a different person, I probably just wouldn't have had those opportunities. Which is, I think, how a lot of people, if you've been like very lucky, can look back on their career and just be like, I met the right person at the right time who like decided to believe in me, which is, you know,
a big thing. Absolutely.
And then after working there for quite some time, actually, I worked there through the end of college and a little bit afterwards. And then pretty soon after that, I started working for Diamond. And that's where kind of my more corporate and, you know, the career that would go on to be kind of what the rest of my life looked like started.
Right, that makes sense.
Our outside sales rep at the time, like, it got to know me through pop culture and was like, hey.
So you're a representative from Diamond.
Mm-hmm, okay. Yeah. And I kind of was looking for something else at that point. Like I said, I was out of college, and I like really enjoyed working at Pop Culture Paradise, but I was managing a couple of locations and just didn't really have the opportunity to like, I didn't see where my career would go from there, so I wanted to start looking into like what next steps would look like. And I had a really supportive group of friends and family and people around me too that like made that a real option for me. And I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do because I also had a degree that I didn't use. You know, I was like, maybe I should do something with this. But luckily I didn't. I'm not even going to say for better or worse at this point. It is for the better. And, you know, hit up Diamond. They were hiring for like, I believe like a customer service rep position or something like that. And I had a couple of interviews, and then by the end of it, they were like, are you interested in joining our national international sales team? Which was like a pretty high up position for like, it was not entry level. I was shocked that it was opened up to me.
And how old are you at this point?
At that point I was probably like 23, 24. So I was like pretty young, man. Too young for that, frankly. And really also just like didn't fully, you know, understand the opportunity I was walking into.
That's fair.
And then I got there and I was like, you know, I moved out to Maryland, started the job, got to know a bunch of the people around me. It was a pretty small team on the national and international side, so I was replacing somebody, and it was really just me and one other person who I'm still very close with, still works in the industry. A lot of the people who worked at Diamond I still talk to. I still see them, you know, regularly. And, you know, they took me on, and another, again, like just very fortunate to have people who are like willing to mentor me and like, you know, see something that I, frankly, even I couldn't see at the time. Or like, hey, this is a kid who's really interested in the industry, but it's like bright enough to make some things work, and let's just see what we can do here. And gave me a lot of opportunities to travel and, you know, see how comics worked overseas and see how people, you know, at that point there were a lot of countries that were kind of like opening up to American pop culture in a different way than they had before. So got to work with a lot of places in a means of like introducing like, hey, you know, here's what's been happening in American pop culture over the last X number of years.
That's a lot to cover.
And really like for merch, when you think about merchandising, that's really a lot of it's just like time capsules of all of these IPs over their history, which is pretty cool. And, you know, overseas, obviously it's easier to sell toys than it is to sell comics because there's just a limited number of languages that comics are printed in.
That makes sense.
But, you know, most people understand, like, you know, 3D art. It's very easy for them to understand, so toys are, you know, an easy introduction to pop culture.
And even if you don't have, like, the lore or the background to that character, you can still play with that character.
Exactly. And people are just, like, interested in the look and the aesthetic, which is something that, like, really was like very fortunate where, like, at that moment, I really started to think that, like, we're a world building and writing and all of these things were the thing that made comics what they were. And it like recentered me and to understand that like a lot of this is like aesthetics and form and like all of these basic parts of just like appreciating a thing before you get to know it. And I'm like, why would you pick up this comic instead of just like enjoying the contents themselves? And that was really good at that time for me to learn, because like if I had kept in that one direction, the way I viewed comics probably would have been much different.
Interesting.
And I think that's what a lot of people kind of see comics. You know, certainly like I know that like retail is a very fascinating beast to me, especially in America. I think it's a little bit different in different countries, but in the United States, like comic retail is very much you're selling to the fishermen and not to the fish. You know, where like you know the goal is to attract the retailers, and for a long time there really wasn't particularly good systems in place to capture what was actually being read, which is also great. Working at Diamond, I was able to have these conversations with people at Diamond who are
in charge of these things.
And we're already thinking about them. So like we could have conversations about like what does readership mean relative to sales. Variants were rising up, and I was like pretty staunchly against variants just conceptually when I was younger, because I thought that it threw off our understanding of supply and demand because we weren't capturing those numbers. And so it would bolster books that didn't necessarily have the readership to follow behind it. And of course everybody knew that, and that's like what they're playing to as well. And it's just a part of collectibles, and now that I'm older I have a slightly different perspective on it, but I still wish that we had done more early on to really capture those numbers, and now we're much better about it.
Now
for sure.
I would say we're too good at it almost.
I'll never say that, but it is way better than when I was younger. You know, I would love to know exactly what, you know, if I could have that scene in Batman where he's connected to all, this is terrifying, but where he's connected to all the cell phones and he knows what everybody is doing. I would love to have that ability with comic readership and just like really have a good understanding of like what exactly is trending right now, and not just in American comics. You know, I spend a lot of time reading manga, I like webtoons a lot, and so I think a lot of times when we talk about comics, particularly people in the American comic industry, we limit it to American comics.
Just the big two. People are not even looking at the indie scene now.
Exactly, and even like the big two is a great example, because like how many people right now are reading the big two, like generationally, how many people have been introduced to the big two through webtoons, right? Like how important has that been? And some of that stuff we will know with time. And I think that this next generation of comic, I'm very excited for the next generation of comic creators. I think they're going to be really, 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 really cool. I think Dave Pilkey has done some really like amazing stuff for this industry, and has taught people how to interact with comics in a way that's like very direct at an age that's very young. You know, like if you read Cat Kids Comic Club stuff, you know, you'll really get. There's a great look at like not just how to make comics, but how to emotionally make comics. Being comfortable with failure, knowing that your best work might not be your first work, you know, that type of stuff. So it's cool to see.
Yeah, that's not even something a lot of people would probably consider even as the emotional work.
Exactly. But if you're going to write about comic people spend so much time complaining about comics, but we spend very little time talking about some of the solutions, especially on the emotional side, where it's like, I've been in this industry for a long time. There's been plenty of years that I've just felt icky. There's been whole parts of my career that I've just felt icky, which is just like, you know.
It's just kind of how comics are.
Exactly. It's how comics are. It's how careers are. You know, like it's you know, not to get too deep into the politics of it, but it's just like an unfortunate part of living in a capitalist society, you know, it's like you don't always get to participate with the things you love in a way that it's monetizable, and sometimes monetizing means, you know, doing it in a way that you don't necessarily love too. And I know a lot of people in comics have felt that way, and are pretty vocal about it, which is good, but I think there's a lot of good things about comics too that's like, yeah, man, we're all here for a reason. You know, and it's not because we hate them. Exactly.
Tell me a little bit of like what you would actually do at Diamond. What did your work
So, a couple of things. Like the first one was particularly on the toy side, there were a few other distributors who we really fed a lot. So sub-distribution was like a big part of my role. I worked with Europe really, really closely early on. And in Europe, there were, essentially 4 major distributors who were covering a big part of the continent. And, working with them to get an understanding of like what trends they're seeing on their end. Their sell-through rates were much different than ours at the time. I'd be very curious to see now, like, on a whole, what some of that stuff looks like. I've worked for other companies selling internationally, but it's been a little while since I've worked for a distributor selling internationally. And I would love to see how that looks now in a more, like, and frankly, a world that's just better connected. But, so a lot of it was getting to understand what those trends are, figuring out how we could apply those trends to what we were seeing, the stuff that would translate well for them. And then, because that was such a big part of the total sales for Diamond, it would also be a pretty major piece of our purchasing too. So I would go to everybody, kind of get an idea of what sales were going to look like, and then that would help to dictate whether or not we were going to even back a line sometimes, or back away from a certain product line, manufacturer, IP, whatever it might be. And then, center that stuff around release events, things that would be pushing those individual properties organically, helping them to create marketing campaigns around it. And then as with time, I got to work more and more on the national side too. So that was some of the first time that I got to work with companies like GameStop and some of these larger specialty stores. So I did a lot of reward stuff for GameStop, and really opened my eyes up in like a whole number of ways. The reward side, we didn't have to do this, but I also would work with them, with the person who worked with them on, their initial introduction into collectibles. So this is around the time when Barnes & Noble and GameStop were both starting to take on collectibles. And Diamond was a major factor behind that. And the guy who sat who was really one of the biggest mentors I've ever had in my life, his name is Ryan. Absolutely amazing guy, fantastic mind for comics and toys. Very few people love them the way that he does. And he is a truly amazing businessman too. So I was, again, just very lucky to be next to the right people. And, he was great about putting me in those conversations too. So I got to work on the reward side, but when we were doing things like planogramming for Barnes & Noble and GameStop, thinking about how we're going to introduce these into the physical space and how they need to be put on shelves and the types of displays that they'll need and that type of stuff. I got to be in
the full environment.
Exactly. I got to be in on those conversations, which is just something looking back on that's just like wild for a kid in his early to mid 20s to have the opportunity to do. And really, again, fueled a lot of the way that I see the industry. So, and then introducing them into new markets. The UAE was really opening up to American pop culture in a different way then. And so I got to work with some really, really cool companies in the Emirates who really believed in comics in this big way. And were setting up stores that were introducing the idea of comics as a collectible and not just as a means of playing with pop culture. Which was really, and it's fun because it's starting to think about these things on a really weird high level. Especially when you're introducing them to people who understand it but haven't necessarily seen it in practice.
And we were kind of just talking about that too. You're just setting the standard of respect that people should approach these.
Exactly. And respect for the merchandise too, which I think is something is so important, but also respect for the source material, which is just as important. Understanding why the choices that were made in the movies were made and how they reflected the times, how they reflected the comics that were written around that same time. And, why the ideas themselves were important. And some of it's fascinating, like the way that the rest of the world interacts with Captain America, obviously, is much different than the way that we interact with him here.
Right.
Batman is another one, too, where like the world's interaction with Batman is much different than our interaction here. And that taught me, like, hey, there's multiple ways to see these things. And coming from a comic retail standpoint, I knew that people interacted with things in different ways, obviously, and, there's so many perspectives to a character and so many ways to enjoy something. But when you take that internationally, you get to see it in a completely different way.
I imagine seeing it in real time and see it in practice is, I wouldn't say jarring, but like...
it is. It's eye-opening. It really, really is. And then the thing that on a business side that it really taught me was, we're moving containers full of units around the world. So, what does it take for a product to leave its factory in Hong Kong to be received by the 3PL, where, maybe they're going to collect it before shipment and how that affects release dates, and then product landing in the United States. What does it take for it to clear port? What does it take for it to clear port in different countries? What are some of the laws around what can be imported in certain places and what can't be? Like, how long can a blade be if it's going to be imported into Brazil? Because there's a lot of cultural significance around, like, large bladed weapons, so really fascinating ways to interact with it, not just on a cultural level but also on a business level. One of my favorite stories is in my first week of working at Diamond, Neil, the guy who I was replacing, was like, I've never had this happen before, but our containers, so when toys and comics come over to everything's put onto these containers that are slowly shipped over the water, and that once they get there, that's going to determine if they can release on time and all kinds of things. And we just had a container ship that was on fire, and we just knew. We didn't know if our product had burned yet. We knew that the ship was on fire. Our freight forwarder made us aware of this, and then it's just what do we do now? And that was my first question. It's what do we do? She was like, frankly, man, none of us know. And so it's a lot of moments like that where it's even at this really high level, there's still weird and fascinating challenges and stuff happening every day
that's never happened before.
Exactly. And I'm sure they probably in the history of Diamond there have been containers on fire. But it was just something that we were all facing for the first time as a team, and we're like, all right, cool. How do we figure this out?
Right. And then there's the emotional work of it too, where it's the loss.
Oh, dude, there's so much. There's so much. I still remember some of that. I remember what was on that container too, because it's just you picture it burning. It's so tough. And the fascinating thing about scaling your passion too. So now it's I used to and I still do. My favorite part of comics is talking about one comic with one person. And now it's how do I talk about a comic to, thousands of people? And, how do I get thousands of people to be able to enjoy this thing? Even if they don't love the comic. How do I get them to, this person loves Heath Ledger's Joker. This is a great introduction. Where do we go from here? What's the next thing that we can sell this person? What's the next thing that will get them interested in,
and just continue that love.
Yeah, exactly. What's the next thing that we can get this person to be interested in? Figure out why they liked Heath Ledger's Joker. What was the reference there that was appealing to them? I'm thinking about how to do that on more than an individual level, which is something that it's part of my job now. It's been a part of my job for a long time. It's how do we do that in different scales?
So before we talk about your exit out of Diamond, there was something I was interested in, which was some of the gifts that you had gotten from working there.
Yeah, so that's hands down one of the best parts about working at Diamond was you get a lot of free things. Also because I was somebody who was young and very, very deeply interested in comics and toys, I got probably more free things than other people did. So even now, quite a few of the books on my shelf came from my time at Diamond. And now that I'm looking at it, I don't know if that's still the case because I've cycled through so many books. But for a long time, that was the basis of my trade paperback collection, the basis of my personal comic collection as far as new floppies went, because they would get any book that we wanted, we could pull off of the shelf as soon as it came out.
That's crazy.
So,
that's dangerous.
Yeah, so on Wednesdays, you know, people who were real comic heads, which, you know, not everybody at Diamond was by any means.
It's just a
we would, my direct supervisor was the person who would put the comics out, so he'd always be like, "Hey, Erik, just so you know, I'm about to put them out so I could be first in line and grab what I needed." Because publishers would send us books so that we could keep, abreast on what they were releasing. And, you know, we had a really large library, too, of comics that people could trade, like, take out and read.
That's cool.
Now that I think about it, I know these... very specific memories of wanting to take this Crusaders stuff.
Ooh, that's a nice addition too.
Yeah, Steven Seagal, Kelly Jones, fantastic books. And then when we moved, I moved while I was working there, and then some of that library just went to employees. So got a ton of books that way. I was very into pirating comics for a long time, and back then everything went on CD, so I would pirate comics and run through like these giant stacks of CDs, and while I was working at Diamond, at one point they were like, "Hey, here's a stack." Everybody knew that I liked pirating comics, which is crazy thinking about that working at Diamond now.
For the distributor.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I was like, I really need more CDs, and somebody gave me a bunch of old CDs that we had, and in those CDs were like just a ton of art that was supposed to go into previews. Some of it was unreleased. A lot of first appearances before the first appearance is released. Very cool, weird, like digital. And now with time, I think it's even more interesting because like that type of like digital artifact is like more interesting than it's ever been with time, probably.
And previous a lot of that stuff is gone too. Now
For sure. Yeah. I mean, most of that stuff is just like floating in the wind. But I absolutely love that stuff. I still have it because it's like, and I was like, I'm not gonna put pirated comics over all of these like, it was like really, really cool random bits of graphic design and like people building previews, years and years and years of it. So, then got lots of cool toys too. Got some really cool prototypes early on. Got a lot of like really great trips. You know, I got to literally travel around the world, selling comics and toys, which is wild for somebody in their 20s. Yeah, literally. I mean, I couldn't that wouldn't have even been a dream that I could have had. You know, like it's not something I could have even dreamed about. But got some really, 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 really cool stuff. And even like with time, like I got people would keep sending me stuff too. This is something I got while I was there though. The like lots of advanced reader editions. So early Pulp Battling Boy stuff for the first series. And there's a few things in here that are different than the final published.
I was literally about to ask if there's stuff that like gets edited out after you even get this version.
Yeah, really not a ton. A lot of it was like color corrections and. The stuff that I think is missing in this one is full pages, but the other Battling Boy is right by your head, so you can see that there's just a lot of additional content, anyways. Because the page and the actual print is the same.
Very cool.
I don't think they have a ton more extras in here, but very, very cool. And introductions to a lot of artists, you know, got to meet some really cool people, and then got to meet some really cool retailers, too.
Yes.
You know, like, it really, you know, very fortunate to just meet cool people all around the world. You know, some of those people I still talk to again, you know, it's just like, you know, making those connections and like, you get to know people on a business level, and then you get to know people on a personal level, and then you just stay together you stay in contact for a long time, and you get to see their kids grow, and you know their like lives change. People get married, so
that's pretty crazy.
It is pretty cool. So lots of fun stuff that I got from Diamond for sure.
That's good.
Yeah.
Any experiences that you look back on and think are just would only happen through Diamond. Maybe we already answered that with the fire, but
yeah, I mean that's something that I probably only would have seen at Diamond. Yeah. You know, here's a couple of things that like really a lot of it is like Steve Geppe's art and his like personal collection was immense.
I still think about the mini golf.
Yeah, so like one of those strange things is like at that very first Diamond, he had collected a bunch of stuff from the Disney parks over the years, statues and stuff, and had just like put it all up in his personal office, which was huge, and like I wish I had a picture of it. It was so cool, and a bunch of great art in there. A bunch of like he collected a lot of Don De La Rosa stuff. You know, he was really into Scrooge McDuck. He had some really we had a lot of cool art on the walls. And then a bunch of stuff from the Disney parks, and he had like a bunch of like putting golf stuff in there with it too. So it was like just a strange, very strange place. And he had, you know, a personal collection that he turned into a museum at one point, and you know, got a lot of time. Got to spend a lot of time with that collection too over the years, because we would do events and stuff there, and got to see a lot of stuff that was in his archives and stuff like that, which would have just been like stuff that like was before my years, and I just typically wouldn't have opportunities to learn about it. Like, especially like the early Kirby stuff. Like I didn't really, even at that age, I knew Kirby had a big career, but hadn't seen a lot of it. You know, so like seeing Kirby's Western stuff and his like superhero stuff is fascinating.
Right, and people forget about the Westerns or the romance books or like anything that's really outside of the superhero.
Yeah, and like a lot of that stuff, it opened it up. My mind was opened up to like all these new old worlds of like of comics by being around that stuff. Early Disney things like. And then just bits of pop culture that I didn't realize that I would really like. Like that was like when I first found out what I knew what Howdy Doody was because I was from the Southwest, but I didn't really understand the cultural importance of Howdy Doody. And then I started watching Howdy Doody episodes online. I was like, this is so strange, and I love that this like that it even got to exist. And now, like the internet, I think there's like a chance for a lot of young people to interact with pop culture in that way now. You know, it's like it's not as siloed to what you get to participate with because it was on air. It was streaming on air,
right? Or
during
you just
your era.
Meet in your life.
Yeah, exactly. You know, you can like find things and like really do deep dives and discoveries like in ways that people couldn't before, which I think once again is going to make for a really cool group of creators and readers over the next like few years.
I hope so.
Yeah, I'm very hopeful for it.
That's good.
Yeah.
Why'd you leave Diamond?
So I had some like pretty serious family stuff happening, so which also is like, it really painted my view of pop culture. My dad was born in 1930.
I forgot about that.
yeah. So you know his idea of
100. My God.
Yeah. So he was like. His interactions with Superman were like the radio serials, you know. So like his pop culture for him was like radio when he was a kid. But anyways, he got older, obviously, and you know got to the end of his life. So I came back out here as he was passing away to help my mom kind of finish up with everything there, and then had the opportunity to come back to Diamond. Actually, I've had that opportunity a couple times.
Maybe not more, but.
Yeah, and you know, I got a lot from the opportunity the first time, but I just had like a different like career path at that point even. So I came back to Phoenix, helped my dad, got kind of some of the other parts of life organized while that was happening, you know, just also family stuff. And then was like, oh man, what am I going to do from here? Because I knew that I had seen comics from like a really high vantage. Wasn't really sure if I wanted to keep working at Diamond, but also knew that like there was really, like going back to working in retail would be difficult for me.
It's almost a step back.
Yeah, not even necessarily, but like also just like, I enjoyed thinking about like containers full of books and like how to introduce comics to like new like readers on like a bigger scale, and it was just like legitimately just like an economy of scale thing. Like my view of what I enjoyed in comics really shifted really pretty quickly. And then I got a job working for Yelp out here, which was like a crazy fun experience because it's like a tech company, and they give me a completely different idea of how companies could run. Because I've been in comics for so long, that was really my complete understanding of the corporate world. And that was really fortunate too. Met some really cool people. We were like fortunate to be able to play Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering and things at work. So still got to have a very nerdy, close group of friends. Yeah. And then eventually Diamond made an offer for me to come back. And I actually, the first time that they made an offer for me to come back, I was like ready to go. And then right before I left, I had like this like really deep feeling in like the pit of my stomach that wasn't the right choice for me. And it was really, really difficult to make, and I had to call them and say, hey, listen, I was supposed to drive across the country in like a day or two. And I was like, it was like from a business point, it was not great. Like honestly, like I should have given them more time. I was still fairly young, and I decided not to go back to work for them. Those relationships stayed strong. The people stayed good. I'm very fortunate that was the case. And they had known, that my life was going through a bunch of changes right then anyways, just because of everything that was happening personally. And so stayed out here, and then I was like, I gotta be in comics somehow. I don't know what it's going to be, and I would rather work in retail while I figure it out.
Yeah, than miss out on.
Yeah, exactly. And I kept saying that I just feel like I'm pressing like pause on my calling. Like I knew what I was supposed to be doing, I just like wasn't following through with it. Yeah. And I was still reading a ton, probably like really in my lifetime, probably some of the best reading that I've done as far as just being like very disciplined about reading and reading new things and talking to people about comics. And then got a job working for Drew. So Drew kind of knew what was going on. And
That's
was
how
like,
we met.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. It's like, I'd love to have you come and work for me. So worked for Ash for a couple of years. Got to know you.
Yeah, because I was harassing you and Jordan. I barely talked to Drew, which is funny.
Yeah. So through this whole thing, one of the really weird things that I've done that I think has really been pretty good for me personally is like I've always had an apprentice. So like working in comics, I've always found somebody who was really interested in comics and just like done what I can to like help spearhead their career and find them a place, get them going. And you were one of the people who like very early on was like kept coming in and asking about comics in this like really deep and interesting way, and then also kept asking about the business of comics in this like really deep and interesting way. And I was like, listen, we probably have room for somebody. we should really. I talked to Drew and I was like, we should probably have a conversation with this woman and see if it's a good fit for her. So because you were just like really consistent and adamant and like interested, and and in my opinion, like interest dictates intelligence. Like if you can be consistently interested in something, you can become like you can gain a meaningful knowledge base. And that's when we first met. So then when I left Ash, I was like, perfect. That left it in some very capable hands. Yep. And then went on to start the next phase of my career, which was, focused around liquidations, really. So I'd always, like, during that time, I knew that I was eventually going to start my own business. It was just a matter of what I wanted to do. Yeah. I'd been buying some small collections and whatnot, and I realized, like, that just, for me to get where I wanted to go, the efficiency of that was going to be difficult for me to just buy large enough collections. And I'd already done some auctions and some big purchases in the past from stores that were going under, and I was like, okay, let me see what I can do, and kind of just focus on knowing that the comic market was changing, knowing that the industry was changing at that time, and there would be some people who would keep up and some people who wouldn't. Yeah. And the people who wanted to keep up would need new inflows and influxes of product, and the people who couldn't keep up would have to figure out ways to get rid of some of their bad stuff.
Makes sense, yeah.
And it was like, going back in the course of my career, like, I wish I had probably just kept talking to people about what I was reading in single comics. I think that was like the liquidations were fantastic. It's something that I was able to build like a really meaningful job and business, and like it paid for, it was a good living for a long time.
That's good, yeah.
But it meant interacting with this thing that I love in a way that was oftentimes meant like helping people figure out off-ramps for their dreams. And yeah, it was just brutal.
Yeah, so what was it like doing liquidations? Because you did them on, like, different scales, where it was, like, individual, just people at home.
Yep.
You did, like, stores, you did multiple stores. Like, tell me about it a little bit.
Yeah, so obviously I would still purchase personal collections, particularly if they were, like, interesting in some specific way. So I got really fortunate. Purchased a couple of good Golden Age collections back in the day. Purchased like a couple of really, really solid signed collections at really good times.
Yeah.
And then also like purchased, just like friends who I knew who had bought comics and didn't want to read them anymore.
Yeah.
And then purchased stores that, there's a couple different ways that I would liquidate. And the best case scenario would be people who had pretty good inventory management skills and were making determinations as to whether or not they still wanted to be in trade paperbacks because, trading cards were doing better for them and single issues were keeping up, but they just needed more space. So then I would come in and help them to take out their trade paperback section, sometimes in multiple places, sometimes in multiple stores, both here and, outside of the States, eventually a little bit outside of the country as well.
You did a lot of traveling, and the time I've known you to liquidate something, you're like, I'm headed to Maine, and it's like, for like 4 days, and you're like, yeah, I have to liquidate like 2 buildings worth of stuff, and then I have a U-Haul trailer coming back.
Yeah, I would do that a lot, where I would just like fly out with a one-way ticket and, purchase like, what excess store stock, dealer stock, which ended up being like storage units and warehouses and stuff like that a lot. And then pack it up in a trailer. Hope to God that I could find somebody on my way back home or close to where I was to sell the product to, so it didn't all have to like physically get lugged back to Arizona, but oftentimes that was the case. So I'd get the product back here and then find new homes for it, once again in the state or out of the state, wherever I could. Sometimes I would do compulsory auctions too. One of the very first big liquidations I did was for that shop Pop Culture Paradise, which
had a while.
Yeah, it's crazy. At that point, it's changed hands a couple of times. But then the landlord was somebody who I was still in touch with, reached out and was like, hey, listen, we would very much like to have somebody come in and help us sell the property that we've had to seize from this business. So then came in and figured out kind of what that would look like and helped them to sell that product. So that was also like a very strange moment too, because that was a store that I had really like built and loved, and
dismantled.
And some of it was still there too, which is also like another lesson in inventory management. It's like, why was this book still here 5 years later? Anyways, so yeah, then I got to travel quite a bit for that. Eventually started to look overseas a little bit more, so started purchasing product in Japan through like third-party proxies, and then eventually was like, let me just start getting in touch with some of these actual retailers, and then doing some of the same stuff that I was doing here over there, bringing product back, and at the time it's still the case now. The dollar yen was really strong, so there was like a good opportunity for American dollars to go into Japan and purchase.
Because you had a pretty solid like Japanese video game collection and stuff that you were selling too.
I sold a lot of Japanese video games, sold some Japanese manga, particularly stuff that had never been printed in the United States or just had like decent historical importance. So one of the cool things, it's collected a lot of Garo over the years, which is just like an important Gekiga manga company, publisher, who produced a bunch of stuff that you would know. The biggest thing I think for most people would be Lone Wolf and Cub. Yeah. But they were also doing like a bunch of like truly avant-garde and alternative comics very, very, very early. Yeah. So I picked up a bunch of stuff that they had for my personal collection from the 60s into the 70s, because that's an era that I've always loved. Yeah. So not as much on the comic side, but plenty of statues and stuff like that too. Some like original manga art. It's a little bit harder to get your hands on, but it's still pretty cool when you get it. So so did all that all the while just like selling comics to retailers, which is like kind of always been the bread and butter, is like finding retailers who I can really work with closely, getting to know them, getting to know their business, and helping them to source the types of books that they need.
And I mean, it's wild that all you were doing was like circulating things, because things will move naturally from someone buying it, loving it for a while, and then taking it one of the thrifted media stores.
Yep.
But when comics were at an idle, you were the one that was keeping up the momentum of...
Yeah, and some of it was just like this, it's something that I think about first it's just like an ecosystem, right? Like it sounds terrible, and I always thought of myself as like, in a good way and a bad way, it's like my job was to scavenge, but your job is also to scavenge, right? And that means like cleaning up the ecosystem, making sure that like energy that is sitting on the floor is not wasted, right? So like if an animal dies, something needs to happen to its pieces, and it needs to go to other places where other living things can live and enjoy it, right? And there's parts of the country where there's just not another store who could absorb that product, or there's not a large enough collector base who can absorb a store who's going under.
Or even an audience that's going in regularly to help make it move. Yeah.
Exactly. So now it's like, okay, well, these comics have to go somewhere, right? Like this product needs to exist. Mm-hmm. It could go to the dump, it can get incinerated or something like that. But like ultimately, like these things that exist in the world have to go someplace else. And one of the really I could literally write essays on this. One of the most fascinating things to me about comics is like just how each individual comic store is almost its like own separate microeconomy. Like from place to place, the comics that sell well, you can find trends, but ultimately like they can be very, very different from store to store, even in a small area, and even more different from region to region. Right. So comics that just wouldn't do well in one context, if they're taken out of that context and brought to another state, brought to another part of the city, you would be shocked at like what the demand is, like just moving things around.
Or how fast they would move through that product that you brought in, because people are hungry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and really what the demand is too, like, and stores that like frankly just couldn't get fed enough because of where they're at, but like do have demand, but because they're in a newer community where there's not like a bunch of people who have purchased books, so there's not a lot of secondhand comics on the market, but there is like a growing group of families, there's a growing group of people in that demographic that's just going to buy a lot of comics from them, and they need something to feed it, but there wasn't a historical precedence in that area for there to be like just a large enough population of secondhand comics to feed their business. And so cool, there's still demand, let's just like find a new supply route, and building those supply chains for companies that just like didn't have access to it. And I think that's still something that's probably like really, really important, especially looking forward. Like the beauty of comics is as we age, like there's just a bigger back catalog of comics.
True, yeah.
I'm
saying I'm a curse, but
yeah, it really is. Yeah, once again, inventory management. Exactly. Any comic store owner will tell you new releases it's a real double-edged sword, because eventually they have to go someplace if they don't sell, and they have a pretty short shelf life.
Right. Which I wish people would understand just a little bit more. And you and I were talking about it earlier, where I was saying how I'm worried we're going to hit another Batman, Catwoman wedding point where we're going on a good track, and all of a sudden we hit a bump, and the interest and demand for things is lost. But
and I think like that's going to happen in a couple of like it's just a cycle that's going to reoccur over and over again. Because like the beauty of comics is we're always finding new readers.
Yeah.
And you know, like the nature of any audience is like there's going to be some type of entropy, and some people are going to stick around, and some people aren't.
Yeah.
And it's just like where you fall in that inertia. Like, are we in a point where there's a lot of people who are getting more interested in it? Right. Or are we at a point where it's like starting to trend down?
Yeah.
And how do we interact with the thing at those moments, right? Because like, and I think that's something that publishers like think about. I think it's easier to think about than to execute, probably.
Or even recognize while it's happening.
Yeah, that's the other side. It's much more difficult to recognize while it's happening. I think that one of the things that comics do, which is fascinating from my perspective, because like I do say that a chunk of my career was just betting on the short, right? Like I knew that there were a lot of people who were going to open comic shops. I knew not all those comic shops were going to do well.
Yeah.
It's just the nature of the thing.
Yeah.
But I think that a lot of publishers don't really necessarily have a plan for what's going to happen when comics start to rise and when the popularity of comics start to fall, and how they will balance the different titles that they're releasing and stuff like that out with it.
Right.
Which is just like some of it's just like it's hard to do in the moment.
Right. You've worked with shops. You've worked with Diamond. Tell me about your work with indie creators.
Yeah, so while I was, running my own business, I was approached by a couple of artists who were like, hey, listen, our career is like moving into a direction that, is becoming much more serious, and there's things that are popping up that, frankly, we just don't know how to navigate, and need some help getting through some of the bigger contract work and getting an understanding of what licensing our properties might look like, if some of the things that we have optioned right now end up coming to fruition. And, that is something that has, been a curse and a boon for comic creators for, years and years and years.
Since the industry started.
Yeah, exactly. Literally since the industry started, because we don't even think about all the early licensing, too. There's so much there. For some reason, we think about comic licensing beginning with, Marvel, and there's a long history of comic licensing.
Yeah, because there was comics
comic
before
merchandise
Marvel.
Going back, a century before.
Even the Disney licensing history is really interesting, and them going out and finding people who are making fake Mickeys and them turning over their carts.
Yeah. Oh, there's so much of that too. The whole nother side is just the weird, ruthless nature of IP enforcement for a while, and not that Disney isn't doing the same thing. They just do it with pen and paper, and they're
with lawyers
still fairly thuggish. But what did you ask? I'm so sorry.
No, indie creators.
Oh yes. So then worked with them to help them find some opportunities to license their work alongside you. To help license their work with manufacturers, help them find places to publish their comics, and then ultimately one of the things that I think we found out together was a lot of it came down to managing the individual projects as well, and new means of distribution. So at that time, Kickstarter was just starting to, it was in existence, rolling in a really serious way, but starting to become more of an everyday consideration for independent creators.
I hate to say that I think the thing that put Kickstarter on the map was the Neil Gaiman book that hit $1 million or something.
Yep.
Yeah.
That and legitimately nobody wants to credit him, but Lady Death, if you go back and you look at the history of comic publishing and kickstarting, very, very, very important and frankly overlooked for a number of reasons. But a true, in multiple eras, a true pathfinder for what comics could look like and what alternate means of distribution could look like.
That's a good point, yeah.
Yeah, and then that includes that includes Kickstarter for sure. Lady Death's history on Kickstarter is absolutely fascinating. But now there's even now more so than ever, physical publishing is becoming softer and softer. It's it's just more difficult for a lot of people, and kickstarting is a way to get in front of your audience and continue to capture your audience as your own. I still think that's a major part of, the future of comics for sure.
Especially with, it feels like a lot of the publishers or the bigger publishers are a bit more picky than they have been previously. And I can't imagine there's so many people who want to get their books off the ground. It is nice that there's alternatives.
I also think we have a lot of creators right now. Like, I think there is the ease of access to the tools that we need to be comic creators has changed. And that allows for there just to be more supply. People need to be pickier for that reason. And I think that also comic publishers spent a lot of time thinking that they could find readers no matter what if they produced it. And wanted to get books out there, and that's just not always financially the most sound way way to go about things. And a lot of other fascinating ways to publish comics, right? So many ways online to publish comics that become so much more complex once you get into the nitty-gritty as to around ownership and publishing rights in the future and stuff like that too, that requires somebody who frankly just hasn't spent their whole life being an artist to navigate sometimes. Plenty of artists have the skills to do it, but just that's not everybody's skill set. It's also not something everybody just cares about. In the same way that I have very little interest in becoming a comic creator outside of just basic hobbyism, they have very little interest in becoming publishers except for the need necessitates it, right? They have to. So it's just the reality of the current world, and that's good and it's bad. I now that I'm always, as I get older, I have a different perspective on the era that we are just leaving. And now I can really see the importance of certain parts of publishing, from particularly around marketing and editing, and kind of some of these larger cohesive things that we need to package the idea of comics, which also I just don't know if it's as necessary as it used to be either, and sell that to a group of people who don't necessarily know about it. That's fair. And I think that plenty of editors, particularly on the editor side, and I think some editors and publishers just get probably a pretty bad rap, and I would have given them that same rap until I got to understand their part of the business, and plenty of them certainly were not operating in good faith, but plenty of them certainly were, and are trying to, for sure. And it can be hard for somebody, especially if you're coming from outside of the space, to kind of know how to navigate all of that. And so that was the initial idea when starting to create an agency who can help people kind of move their work from the time that it was a concept to the time that you get a whole team together and how that team works together to the point of publishing. And pitching, and then pitching and publishing, and then everything that comes along with collecting the money after that as well.
And then tell me a little bit about Corbin. That was the...
So well before that, actually, so Carbon. So I always enjoyed trying new things in the industry and just kind of figuring out what was going to happen next. So this was, what year would a Carbon be? That would be
It was 16, 17?
Yeah, probably 2016, 2017. I knew that there were a couple of things that were happening in the independent comic world that was just preventing people from really having the scope that they needed to touch base with the bigger audience. I follow, and at the time I'm not on social media the way I was then. I followed a lot of independent comic creators, spent a lot of time purchasing their books and figuring out how to purchase their books, which isn't always as easy as just visiting their website. Which is a thing. So I kind of knew that at a certain point Diamond just wouldn't be with us. I had made that bet pretty early on, too early, and that
wasn't wrong though.
Wasn't wrong, but it was certainly too early, and just knew that once distribution changed, that the person who would suffer the most was going to be independent artists. So wanted to create a way that we could gather independent comic creators' works into a single place, where if you were somebody who was interested in them, you could pick up a copy of our magazine that would list the artist, what their upcoming work was, some of their back catalog, and then how to get in touch with them to purchase from them directly, rather than through being a middleman or through a distributor, right? And there's been several things like that since then,
which is kind of funny.
Again, I think I was just a little bit ahead. It's a real first the worst scenario.
Well, it's funny because it's like this thing is necessary, but the world wasn't ready for it yet.
And I think like some of it too is like coming from a business perspective and not the perspective of an artist. I probably really should have brought on an artist earlier, and I worked with some artists like really closely at the time to kind of conceptualize how it would look, but they should have been more involved in the execution, because having the conversation with artists around like, no, really, I promise you this is a free publication. I'm not going to charge you anything for it, because the plan was to charge retailers to carry it. And then artists could put their work in there for free, and then retailers would be charged to carry it. And people could place ads in the book who weren't artists, right? So like a retailer could put an ad into the book if they wanted to talk about their new book. The publisher could put an ad in the book if they're trying to attract artists, that type of stuff. It never came to fruition. There was a couple of mock-ups for it. I'm trying to think if I even got one published. I don't think I actually got one out.
I can picture like...
And I know I had at least 2 volumes out.
There's like a little bird and it's red. I can picture something. There was at one point there was a printed version. It never made it in any stores in a meaningful way, but it was like a fun idea. And went on to really become like that same idea of how do we figure out and navigate this world of like more and more complex marketing for comic creators. Like a lot of that informed how I went on to create eventually the agency that would help independent comic creators. We just knew that there was something like that was needed, and didn't really necessarily know the best structure for it. And then eventually realized that with my background, the best protection I could provide was just by being like a really firm negotiator and somebody who's good with contracts. And protecting people's IPs and...
exactly. And that's what those two things are about, is like making sure people got paid what they needed to, and that the contracts that they were signing were as solid as possible.
Now
exactly.
And later. And so then helping indie creators was kind of the last thing you were doing before you had joined Toy Temple. What do you want for your future in comics and the future of comics? So yourself and for the industry.
One of those is easier for me to answer than the other, probably. I think it's easier for me to pontificate about what I would want in like a bigger way for comics than it is for me on a personal level. I'll start there.
That's
So
fun.
So I think that really I see that there's going to be a new group of creators and a new group of readers who are just like better educated about comic creation than they have been in the past. They have way more tools at their disposal to make comics. They have way more opportunities to publish those comics. And they're going to have decreasing opportunities to license and merchandise those comics with time. I think that's just like the curve of things. And I think that those people are going to do a great job of just bringing back comics to the core of telling stories and figuring out how to monetize those stories in new and interesting ways. And I think, in my personal opinion, I think that probably becomes much more decentralized. I think that we're going to have a lot more comics that are going to be published solely online, and we just won't need platforms to be as big of a part of that as we have in the past. And I think that as time goes on, and with time, the people who are younger than us, their idea of comics is no longer the big 2%.
Especially with all the manga and everything that's available.
Exactly.
Right now.
And that's just not how they're going to see comics. It's not going to see how they view comic creation, which means we're going to get a much more varied group of storytelling, which has kind of always been the case. Like with time, progressively, that seems to be the trend. And I think those people are going to be much better at publishing books and marketing them themselves, and there's going to be a different means of searching for those comics, so it's going to be much easier for people to find them than it has been in the past. What that looks like exactly, I don't really know, but it is kind of how I see things going. And I think that the new group of comic creators is going to be much more focused on making independent comics and telling stories that are both like genre, but not necessarily superhero genre.
One thing I'm excited for, and Absolute Martian Manhunter was a big example of this, or the most recent example of this, is playing with comics. There's a few moments where you have to hold up the page for it to blend through. I also recently found out that Watchmen, one of the issues, you get to the center and you can start reading it backwards and it'll mirror itself. There's a couple of comics that do that I really love. This comic, Trillium, I don't remember. Trillium's good.
I think that they actually fucked it up when they put it in trade paperback. They did. Because it was meant to be read as multiple stories, and then you would flip it over, and then the stories would meet in the middle. And it's those type of things, like playing with comics. Ruby, our friend Ruby, has some like absolutely fascinating ideas around this, and like using place in comics that I think are really, really interesting, and like the storytelling around that in a digital space really, really, really changes, and frankly some of it is just like over my head. But I know she has a really particularly good mind for it. But I do think like playing with comics is certainly a thing. I think that our experience with media after we put down the media is going to change, just like generally. And so one of the things that I really enjoy about webtoons is like in between webtoon chapters, I still have lots of opportunities to interact with the creators because of the way that they handle social media and announcements to their pages and stuff like that. And I know that's just a trend more generally now. A lot of comic creators have newsletters, a lot of them have like Patreons and podcasts and stuff like that.
And this is something I was talking to Billy earlier too, where I was like, the more transparency you have and people can watch you evolve, the more likely they're going to continue to follow you. You know, like there's just like that little bit of connection where they're like rooting for you along the way, which is great and it would definitely necessary, and I think something that like is also new for creators, right? I don't know if Kirby heard all the fans that he had say how much they love him.
And you know, probably more, just as much as people did now because of the way they wrote in back then.
That's true.
You know, like and I think that's so fascinating. Like Japan is really good at this too. Is like there's a lot of feedback from comic readers. You know, they're really, really from comic reader to comic creator, and then everywhere in between, it's just not as good. You know, like the communication between comic retailers and comic readers could be improved upon. You know, that conversation between comic readers and comic distributors could be improved upon, certainly.
I think influencers are closing the gap a little bit on that.
I think so too.
I don't know how serious the conversations are yet either, though.
And I think that with time too, there's a lot of people who are becoming comic influencers who like don't necessarily have the background in comics, which is fine because that's an important part of like introducing new blood to comics. But doesn't necessarily make them the best people to say, hey, I see this major trend happening and I think we should act on it in this way. Sometimes it does because you need somebody who has an outside vision, but
sometimes it doesn't.
Sometimes it doesn't. I think more often than not it probably doesn't. And then for my personal time in comics, like there's this thing in like old like romances, like back in the day, like old novels, not like romance, like romantic, but like old books, where like a lot of knights as they get older they become this thing called a vavasseur, which is like a person who kind of lives on the outskirts and no longer is an active knight but has the skills to equip young knights with what they need to go forward. And that's always been kind of where I saw the next part of my career going is. It's like I hope that instead of being somebody who's constantly trying to figure it out forever, that I will get to the point where I'm much better about listening to younger people about what they think the future of comics is, and then finding the right people to invest in and finding the right people to kind of like help push their career forward. That's something that you know, when me and you, that I always saw in you, and something that like over the years, like opportunities to like help you progress your career. If I ever see something that's like, this year would be great for this, I try to reach out whenever possible because I just think that you have a different mind for comics than me and my generation, and that's super good. It's just important.
And I appreciate it. I told you this too. Like, both of you guys were the ones who like let me in the industry, and I'm super grateful that both of you still like think of me when things pop up.
No, I mean that's what it should be all about, and like I can't wait for you to get to the point where you're doing that for people too. I really see like the future of comics is kind of beyond me at this point, and I'm here to help with like historical data and like business acumen that some people might not have.
Right. Even just your perspective on comics, because there's a lot of things where you've told me like look at it this way, and then both of us have learned new things from that. And especially the last few years with like things changing, walking through it with you was a lot of fun. So.
Yeah, it's been a really fun years for that type of stuff too. Like it's great years to think about what's going to happen with comics. But I'm pretty conscious about like the future of the comic industry is less in my hands than the future of enjoying comics is. Like I'll be reading comics till the day I die. I'll always be a spectator. I'll always be here like reading about what people are doing in the industry. I will always be an active participant in the industry.
Maybe a bit of a critic, but that's fine.
Yeah, maybe a bit of a critic. And I'll certainly work someplace adjacent, always, or in like at a distributor or something like that. That will never change. But I think that the people who have an eye for what comics should look like are not me. And I'm very happy with that. I think I've done I've really enjoyed my time working with that big picture stuff, and I'm very ready for people who are like smarter and younger than me to just like pick up that torch.
That's good, because some people don't know when to quit either, and that can be problematic.
I mean, it is a problem in retail for sure. A lot of these guys should have stopped selling comics years ago, handed it off to somebody who's younger and more knowledgeable. Not even joking, it's a real fucking problem. I hate it. Drew, you're fantastic. That's not targeted towards you. You're still actively reading. I absolutely love it. But if you go state to state, shop to shop, a lot of people who are still pushing the comics that they read 20 years ago as if this is what's important in comics now, and it's just fucking not. And new people need to come in with new blood and new ideas to help propel what's going to happen next. Yeah, exactly.
I agree. I think that's it for this episode.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for
thank you guys.
Talking. And that was an episode of Comics Ruined My Life. I only called it that because I can't get away from comics.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, comics have like whatever else I was supposed to be in life will never happen. Because it will. Yeah, exactly. It very well could have been for the better in multiple places. My life could have been like really bad in some ways if I hadn't been with comics. It's very, very, very lucky, but also I will only do one thing. I'll only work in comics and toys until the day I die, probably. And that's totally fine. That's so it certainly has, at the very least, it's ruined me if it hasn't ruined my life. So.
Awesome.
Yeah, cool. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and thanks for coming on.
Yeah, of course.
And we're done.
Sweet.